a crisp navy blue uniform with 4 gold stripes gleaming on the sleeves, a flawless aviation record spanning 2 decades. But to one arrogant security officer, none of that mattered. To him, the man in the captain's uniform was simply a threat who did not fit the profile. What began as a power trip in a crowded terminal escalated into a humiliating public arrest, triggered an $11 million lawsuit, the firing of an entire security agency, and a reckoning that shook the aviation industry to its core. The weather over Chicago O'Hare International Airport was unforgiving. Sheets of icy November rain battered the massive glass windows of Terminal 5, distorting the flashing lights of baggage tugs and fueling trucks that moved like mechanical ants across the wet tarmac below. Inside, the terminal was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled overhead announcements, and the collective anxiety of thousands of travelers desperate to get home before the incoming winter storm grounded the evening departures. For Captain Cole Brennan, however, the storm was just another variable in a mathematical equation he had solved 1,000 times. At 42, Cole was one of Meridian Airlines' youngest and most respected senior captains, commanding the Boeing 777-300ER on the carrier's highly lucrative transatlantic routes. With more than 14,000 flight hours, a background flying FA-18 Hornets in the Navy, and a reputation for icy calm under pressure, he was a master of his craft. He was also part of a distinct minority. Black commercial airline captains make up less than 3% of the industry in the United States. Cole wore his uniform not only with professional pride, but with a deep, quiet reverence for the barriers his presence dismantled every time he walked through an airport concourse. His uniform was immaculate. The heavy navy blue blazer was perfectly tailored. The 4 gold stripes on his cuffs caught the fluorescent terminal lights. His Meridian Airlines wings were pinned precisely over his left breast pocket. It was 7:51 p.m., Flight 802 to London. Heathrow was scheduled for pushback in exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes. Cole dragged his matte black roller bag behind him, his flight kit resting securely on top. He was heading toward Gate M12, navigating the sea of passengers with the practiced, graceful pace of a man who belonged exactly where he was. Recently, the airport authority had made a controversial administrative decision. To cut costs and ease the burden on federal agents, they had contracted a private firm, Ironclad Security Group, to manage the secondary employee access portals and specific sterile corridors used by flight crews and tarmac workers. Ironclad had a reputation that preceded it, a company comprised largely of aggressive former local law enforcement and private military contractors who brought a heavy-handed street cop mentality to the nuanced world of aviation security. Meridian Airlines had fought the contract, arguing that private guards lacked the specialized training required for Federal Aviation Administration and known crew member protocols. Their concerns had been overruled by the city. Tonight, that bureaucratic oversight was about to combust. Cole approached the crew bypass corridor adjacent to Gate M12. The bypass was a designated sterile area meant to allow pilots and flight attendants direct access to the jet bridge and operations desk without fighting through the boarding queues. At the entrance to the corridor stood Officer Trent Harlan. Harlan was a man whose posture screamed of overcompensated authority. Ironclad's all-black tactical uniform, complete with a heavy-duty belt, radio, and handcuffs, hung on him like armor. He leaned against the podium with a scowl that seemed permanently etched into his features. Harlan had been on the job for exactly 3 weeks, having transitioned from a turbulent stint as a municipal patrol officer in a neighboring county. He was exactly the kind of hire Meridian Airlines had warned the airport authority about. As Cole approached the stanchions, he instinctively reached for his lanyard, presenting his Meridian Airlines crew badge and his federally issued known crew member ID. It was a fluid motion, something he had done 10,000 times before. "Evening," Cole said, his voice a rich, calm baritone. He swiped his KCM card over the optical scanner. The machine beeped. A green light illuminated instantly, confirming his clearance in the federal database. Cole took a step forward to bypass the podium, his mind already shifting to the pre-flight weather briefing and the fuel load required to navigate around the storm cell over the Atlantic. He did not make it 2 steps. "Hold it right there." The voice barked like a gunshot. Cole paused and turned his head. Officer Harlan had stepped out from behind the podium, physically inserting himself into the narrow walkway and blocking Cole's path. Harlan's hand rested casually, yet threateningly, on his duty belt right next to his handcuffs. "Can I help you, officer?" Cole asked, keeping his tone perfectly neutral. "I didn't say you could walk through," Harlan snapped, looking Cole up and down with a gaze dripping with suspicion and blatant disrespect. "Step back behind the red line." Cole blinked, mildly confused but unbothered. He took a half step back and gestured toward the scanner. "The machine gave me the green light. I'm the captain for the London flight right behind you. I need to get down to the aircraft to begin my pre-flight walk-around." "I don't care what the machine did," Harlan said, his voice rising in volume, clearly intending to draw the attention of the passengers waiting in the nearby seating area. "Hand me the ID." Cole sighed softly, unclipped the plastic housing from his lanyard, and handed over his Meridian KCM badge. Harlan snatched it out of his hand. He held it up to the light, squinting at it, his thumb aggressively rubbing over the holographic seal as if trying to peel it off. He looked at the photo, then looked at Cole, his eyes narrowing. "This is a fake," Harlan declared loudly. The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. A few passengers sitting at the nearby gate turned their heads, their conversations halting. Cole maintained his composure, though a cold knot began to form in his stomach. He recognized the tone. It was the tone of a man who had already made up his mind based on a prejudiced narrative he had constructed the moment he saw Cole walking down the concourse. "Officer, I assure you it is not fake," Cole said, his voice steady, employing the same de-escalation tone he used during cockpit emergencies. "It just scanned perfectly in the federal system. If you look at the badge, you'll see the FAA watermark. I am Captain Cole Brennan, employee number 44902. If you have an issue, you can call the Meridian Operations Desk right down there at the gate." "I don't need to call anyone to tell me when I'm looking at a fraudulent ID," Harlan sneered, taking a step closer to Cole and attempting to use his physical presence for intimidation. "Where'd you get this? You buy it online to bypass the TSA line?" "I am the pilot in command of Flight 802, Cole repeated, his voice dropping an octave and carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "I have a crew of 14 and 340 passengers waiting for me. I need you to hand my badge back and step aside." "You aren't commanding anything tonight, pal," Harlan spat, a mocking smirk crossing his face. "People like you don't fly 747s. Now you're going to step over to the wall, put your hands on the glass, and wait while I call this in." The terminal around gate M12 suddenly felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of it. The casual murmur of waiting travelers died down, replaced by the acute, uncomfortable silence of people witnessing a slow-motion car crash. Smartphones began to emerge from pockets, camera lenses pointing toward the crew corridor. Cole stood his ground. He did not move toward the wall, nor did he raise his voice. He knew the unwritten rules of survival in America. He knew that any sudden movement, any display of justifiable anger, would be instantly weaponized against him. "Officer Harlan," Cole said, having read the nameplate on the man's tactical vest. "I am going to reach into my left breast pocket and take out my wallet. Inside is my Federal Aviation Administration Airline Transport Pilot Certificate, my first-class medical certificate, and my United States passport. I will hand them to you, but I am not putting my hands on the wall. I am a working airline captain in uniform." Before Harlan could respond, Cole slowly, deliberately extracted his wallet, pulled out the requested federal documents and held them out. Harlan did not take them. Instead, his face flushed with a dark, furious red. He was not used to being spoken to with such calm, unyielding authority. In Harlan's world, his badge meant absolute submission from everyone else. "I gave you a lawful order," Harlan shouted, his hand unsnapping the retention strap on his handcuffs. "I said hands on the wall. You are in possession of forged federal documents and attempting to breach a secure aviation area." "What the hell is going on here?" The voice came from behind Cole. Striding quickly down the concourse was First Officer Tyler Brooks, a 30-something former Coast Guard pilot who had flown with Cole for the past 2 years. Tyler, a tall, broad-shouldered white man, looked bewildered as he took in the scene, his respected captain being cornered by a glorified rent-a-cop. "Back off, sir. This doesn't concern you," Harlan barked at Tyler, raising a hand in a stop gesture. "It absolutely concerns me," Tyler said, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Cole. He tapped the 3 stripes on his own shoulder. "He's my captain. We have a flight to prep. What is the problem here?" "The problem is your buddy here is trying to use a fake ID to get onto the tarmac," Harlan sneered. Tyler let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Are you out of your mind? That's Captain Cole Brennan. He's been with Meridian for 12 years. He's one of the chief check airmen for the entire fleet. Check the KCM scanner, you idiot." The insult was the match that lit the powder keg. Harlan, humiliated in front of an audience of now dozens of filming passengers, keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Post 4. I need backup at Gate M12. I have a suspect attempting to breach the sterile corridor with fraudulent ID and a second individual interfering with the detainment." Cole turned to Tyler, his voice low and tight. "Tyler, don't engage. Go down to the podium. Get Raymond Ellis on the phone right now. Tell him what's happening." "I'm not leaving you here with this guy, Cole," Tyler muttered, his fists clenching. "That's an order, First Officer," Cole said sharply. It was the voice of the cockpit, the voice that brooked no argument. Tyler hesitated, then nodded tightly, backing away and pulling out his cell phone as he jogged toward the Meridian Gate agents, who were already staring in horror at the unfolding scene. Harlan took a step toward Cole, unclipping his handcuffs entirely. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Cole looked at the handcuffs, then looked Harlan dead in the eye. The indignity of it washed over him, a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He had served his country. He had safely transported hundreds of thousands of souls across oceans. He had spent his entire life building a flawless reputation, and it was being stripped away in a busy airport terminal by a man who could not see past the color of his skin. "If you put those on me," Cole said, his voice a lethal, quiet whisper that carried over the ambient noise, "you will end your career tonight. I promise you that." Harlan grabbed Cole's left arm roughly, yanking it behind his back. Cole did not resist physically, knowing that any tension in his muscles would be classified as resisting arrest. The cold steel clamped down on his wrist, biting into the cuff of his crisp white shirt. Harlan wrenched his right arm back, snapping the second cuff into place. The sound of the ratcheting metal echoed in Cole's ears, louder than a jet engine. Gasps rippled through the crowd of passengers. "Oh my God, they're arresting the pilot!" a woman in the front row exclaimed, her phone capturing every second in high definition. "He didn't even do anything," a businessman yelled from the back. "He just scanned his badge." "Stand back, Ironclad security, everyone back." 3 more security officers, clad in the same aggressive black uniforms, came jogging down the concourse, pushing their way through the crowd. Leading them was Sergeant Wade Thornton, a heavy-set man with a shaved head and a severely misplaced sense of self-importance. "What do we got, Harlan?" Thornton demanded, breathing heavily as he arrived at the scene. "Suspect attempted to breach KCM with a fake Meridian captain's badge," Harlan reported, clearly emboldened by his backup. "Refused lawful orders, was getting combative." Cole, standing perfectly still with his hands cuffed behind his back, looked at Thornton. "Sergeant, I am Captain Cole Brennan. I am the pilot for Flight 802. Your officer is detaining me on absolutely zero legal grounds. My ID scanned perfectly. My federal certificates are in his hand. If you do not remove these cuffs immediately, this airline will rain hellfire on your company." Thornton looked at Cole. He looked at the impeccably tailored uniform, the gold stripes, the command presence that radiated from the man even in handcuffs. Any rational security professional would have instantly recognized a massive liability unfolding. A quick radio call to the gate, a quick check of the federal database on Thornton's own tablet would have cleared it up in 10 seconds. But Ironclad security had a culture of absolute, unquestioning solidarity. In their ranks, an officer was never wrong, especially when dealing with the public. To back down now in front of 50 filming passengers would be a sign of weakness. Thornton leaned in close to Cole. "Listen to me, buddy. I don't care if you bought that costume at a Halloween store. My officer says your ID is fake. That makes it fake until we say otherwise. You're going to the holding room." "Walk," Harlan commanded, giving Cole a hard shove between the shoulder blades. The physical push nearly caused Cole to stumble over his own flight bag, but he caught his balance, drawing on every ounce of military discipline he possessed to keep his face completely stoic. He allowed himself to be paraded through his own workplace. They marched him away from the gate down the center of the concourse. It was a walk of shame designed for maximum humiliation. Hundreds of eyes tracked him. Whispers hissed through the terminal. Is he a terrorist? Did he show up drunk? I'm not flying this airline. Every step felt like a hammer striking an anvil inside Cole's chest. The psychological violence of the moment was suffocating. He was a man who commanded multi-million-dollar aircraft, entrusted with hundreds of lives, reduced to a shackled spectacle because a high school dropout security guard found his existence in a captain's uniform implausible. Meanwhile, back at Gate M12, pure chaos had erupted. First Officer Tyler Brooks had reached the podium, furiously dialing his phone. The lead gate agent, a veteran named Elena Vargas, was already frantically typing on her terminal. "Tyler, where is Cole?" Elena asked, her eyes wide with panic as she saw the plane at the gate fully catered, baggage loaded, but utterly devoid of its captain. "They arrested him. Some rent-a-cop named Harlan cuffed him and dragged him off," Tyler shouted over the din of the terminal. "Get Ellis, get operations, ground this flight." At that exact moment, Raymond Ellis, Meridian Airlines Director of Hub Operations for Chicago, was sitting in his glass-walled office overlooking the tarmac, trying to untangle the logistical nightmare of the incoming storm. His desk phone rang. It was the emergency line from Terminal 5. "Ellis," he answered brusquely. "Raymond, it's Elena at M12. Ironclad security just arrested Captain Brennan." Ellis froze, his coffee cup pausing halfway to his mouth. "Repeat that, Elena. Did you say Cole Brennan?" "Yes, right at the KCM portal. They said his ID was fake. They handcuffed him in front of the whole gate. Tyler Brooks is here. He said the guard just profiled Cole and went on a power trip." Ellis did not say a word. He slammed the phone down, grabbed his security access badge, and sprinted out of his office. Raymond Ellis was a ruthlessly efficient airline executive, a man who viewed delays in minutes and millions of dollars. But more importantly, he knew Cole Brennan personally. He knew Cole's record. The idea that Cole would have a fake ID or do anything to jeopardize a flight was beyond laughable. It was insulting. Down in the bowels of Terminal 5, in a windowless cinder-block room designated for Ironclad's temporary staging, Cole was forced to sit on a metal bench. His hands were still cuffed tightly behind him. The metal had begun to cut off the circulation to his fingers, sending painful pins and needles up his forearms. Harlan and Thornton stood by the door, speaking in hushed, arrogant tones, occasionally looking over at Cole with smug satisfaction. "We call Chicago PD?" Harlan asked. "Yeah, let them haul him downtown for federal forgery," Thornton replied, crossing his arms. "You haven't called the police yet?" Cole spoke up, his voice echoing slightly in the bare room. Thornton glared at him. Speak when spoken to. You haven't called the real police, because the second a sworn Chicago police officer walks through that door and runs my name, they are going to realize you just unlawfully detained and kidnapped a commercial airline pilot, Cole said, his voice eerily calm, dissecting their bravado with surgical precision. You're delaying Flight 802. Every minute that plane sits at the gate costs Meridian Airlines thousands of dollars. We are approaching a hard curfew for the London arrival slot. If we miss it, the flight cancels. You're looking at $250,000 in operational losses, passenger compensation, and hotel vouchers. He paused, letting the numbers sink in, watching the slight twitch in Thornton's jaw. And that, Cole continued softly, is nothing compared to what my attorneys are going to do to your company. Before Thornton could retort, the heavy steel door to the holding room flew open with such force it slammed against the cinder block wall. Standing in the doorway, chest heaving, face pale with absolute fury, was Raymond Ellis. Behind him were two actual Chicago Police Department officers, looking deeply concerned, and First Officer Tyler Brooks. Ellis looked at Cole sitting on the bench in cuffs, his gold stripes crumpled, his dignity under assault. A terrifying silence descended on the room. Ellis turned his head slowly to look at Sergeant Thornton. When he spoke, his voice trembled with a rage so pure it lowered the temperature of the room. "Who has the keys?" Ellis demanded. "Sir, this is a secure area. You can't," Harlan started to say, stepping forward. "Shut your mouth!" Ellis roared, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. He pointed a trembling finger at Harlan. "I am the Director of Operations for Meridian Airlines. That man is my senior Boeing 777 captain. You have grounded my flagship flight. Now, who has the goddamn keys to those cuffs?" Thornton, suddenly realizing the catastrophic magnitude of their mistake, paled. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by sudden, sharp terror. He looked at the two Chicago PD officers for backup. The older of the two CPD officers, a grizzled sergeant with a thick mustache, shook his head slowly. "Don't look at me, pal. You guys are private security. If you cuffed an airline captain who flashed a valid KCM badge, you're on your own. Unlock him. Now." Harlan, his hand suddenly shaking, fumbled for the keys on his belt. He walked over to Cole, avoiding eye contact, and unlocked the cuffs. Cole brought his arms forward slowly. He did not rub his wrists. He did not show them the pain. He simply stood up, towering over Harlan, adjusting the cuffs of his blazer and smoothing his tie. He reached out and plucked his wallet, his passport, and his Meridian ID from the table where Harlan had carelessly tossed them. "Are you okay, Cole?" Ellis asked, his voice softening. "I am physically fine, Raymond," Cole said. He looked at his watch. "It's 8:42 p.m. We have missed our pushback window. The crew will time out in 45 minutes under Part 117 regulations if we don't get wheels up. Can we make the slot?" "No," Ellis said bitterly. "Air traffic control just pulled our clearance because of the storm cell moving in. They gave our slot to a British Airways flight. We are grounded until tomorrow morning." Cole closed his eyes for a brief second. 340 people. Vacations ruined. Business meetings missed. Connections destroyed. All because of a single man's unchecked prejudice. Cole opened his eyes and looked directly at Harlan, who was now shrinking back against the wall, and then at Thornton. "You didn't just delay a flight," Cole said quietly to the two guards. "You picked the wrong man on the wrong day." As Cole walked out of the holding room, flanked by his first officer and the director of operations, the wheels of a massive multi-million-dollar legal and corporate reckoning had already begun to turn. The humiliation was over. The war was about to begin. The walk back through Terminal 5 was a completely different experience. Cole Brennan was no longer a man in cuffs being paraded like a criminal. He was a captain, flanked by a protective vanguard of airline executives and sympathetic police officers. Yet, the damage was already done. As he passed the gate where Flight 802 was supposed to board, He saw the exhausted, frustrated faces of the passengers now queuing at the customer service desk. Some recognized him. A few clapped, a spontaneous, scattered applause of solidarity. Others simply stared, still trying to process how the commander of a massive transatlantic jet could be hauled away by a mall cop in a tactical vest. Cole did not go home immediately. Per Meridian Airlines protocol for any major operational disruption, he was required to submit an incident report. He sat in Raymond Ellis's glass-walled office, the runway lights blinking through the rain in the background, methodically typing out a sterile, factual account of the night's events. He stripped all emotion from the prose. At 1951, I swiped my KCM badge. At 1952, Officer Trent Harlan blocked my path. "You don't have to do this tonight, Cole," Ellis said softly, placing a fresh cup of black coffee on the desk. "Go home, be with your family. We have our legal team working on the injunction against Ironclad." "If I don't write it down, they'll say I needed time to coordinate my story," Cole replied, without looking up from the keyboard. "I want my exact chronological account, time-stamped in the FAA and corporate databases, before Ironclad's PR team wakes up." Cole was right to be proactive, but he underestimated the speed of the digital age. By the time he finally drove his car into his suburban driveway at 2:22 a.m., the narrative was already slipping out of corporate control and into the wild west of the internet. Derek Quinn, a 28-year-old software engineer and a passenger who had been sitting in the front row at gate M12, had recorded the entire 4-minute confrontation on his smartphone in crisp 4K resolution. Appalled by what he had witnessed, Derek did not just send the video to Meridian Airlines. He uploaded it to X and YouTube. His caption was simple but explosive. "Tonight at O'Hare, a power-tripping rent-a-cop arrests the black captain of our 777 because he didn't believe a black man could be a pilot. Flight canceled. Hundreds stranded. Unbelievable." At 3:05 a.m., the video had 10,000 views. By 6:10 a.m., as the morning news networks began their broadcasts, it had crossed 2 million. By 9:15 a.m., it was a global conflagration. The footage was undeniable. It showed Cole's immaculate professionalism contrasting sharply with Harlan's red-faced, bulging-veined aggression. The audio was crystal clear. Harlan's sneering accusations of fake ID, Cole's calm recitation of his employee number, the sickening click-click of the handcuffs, and First Officer Tyler Brooks desperately trying to intervene. Cole woke up at 10:07 a.m. to a phone that was practically vibrating off his nightstand. He had over 300 unread messages. Friends from his Navy squadron, fellow pilots from Delta and United, extended family members, and a dozen news producers desperate for an exclusive interview. Downstairs, his wife, Michelle, was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at her tablet, her hand covering her mouth. She looked up as Cole walked in, her eyes rimmed with red. "Cole," she whispered, turning the screen toward him. It was CNN. A panel of experts was dissecting the video frame by frame under the banner, "Pilot profiled, airline captain arrested at own gate." "I'm okay, Michelle," Cole said quietly, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. But as he watched himself being shoved toward the wall on national television, the stoicism he had maintained the night before began to fracture. A cold, heavy anger, a delayed shockwave from the humiliation, settled deep into his bones. The phone rang again. It was a restricted number. Cole answered it. "Captain Brennan, this is William Harrington," a sharp, gravelly voice said. Cole instantly recognized the name. William Harrington was the founding partner of Harrington and Vail, one of the most feared and respected civil rights and corporate litigation firms in Chicago. Harrington was a legal heavyweight, a man who had famously bankrupted a corrupt municipal police department a decade prior. "Mr. Harrington," Cole replied, "I assume you've seen the news?" "I have. Raymond Ellis called me at dawn. Meridian Airlines wants to retain my firm to represent you personally at their total expense. But before I agree to that, I need to know what you want, Cole. Because Meridian wants to protect their brand and punish Ironclad security. But you are the one who was put in chains. Do you want an apology and a quiet settlement? Or do you want to burn this security company to the absolute ground? Cole looked at the television screen. He saw Harlan pushing him. He thought about the thousands of young black kids who dreamed of flying, who might watch that video and think the uniform would not protect them from the indignity of the street. I want to burn them to the ground, Mr. Harrington, Cole said, his voice dropping to that lethal cockpit tone. Good. Be at my office at 2:10. Wear a suit. The war starts today. Meanwhile, inside the glass and steel headquarters of Ironclad Security Group, panic was metastasizing into desperation. Victor Langford, the CEO of Ironclad, was a former private military contractor who ran his company like a paramilitary operation. He was currently pacing the length of his boardroom, staring at a massive monitor playing the viral video on an endless loop. Around the table sat his legal counsel, his PR director, and an incredibly pale Sergeant Wade Thornton, who had been summoned from the airport. How does this happen? Langford roared, slamming his palms on the polished mahogany table. We have a $60 million contract with the airport authority, a contract that is up for renewal in 3 months, and you imbeciles arrest a senior captain of the largest airline at the hub. Sir, Harlan believed the ID was fraudulent, Thornton stammered, sweating profusely. The suspect, the pilot, was being uncooperative. Shut up, Langford snapped. He turned to his PR director. How bad is it? It's catastrophic, Victor, the PR director replied grimly. Meridian Airlines just issued a press statement condemning us. The pilots' union, ALPA, is threatening a walkout if our guards are allowed anywhere near the KCM portals. We are trending #1 worldwide, and none of it is good. Langford's eyes narrowed. He was not a man who surrendered. In the private security world, admitting fault was a death sentence for future contracts. If they fired Harlan and apologized, they admitted liability, opening themselves up to massive lawsuits from both the pilot and the airline. We do not apologize, Langford said coldly, a dangerous plan forming in his mind. If we admit our guy was completely out of line, the city voids our contract for breach of standard care. We have to control the narrative. We need to make the pilot look like the aggressor, or at least make him look like a security risk. Victor, you can't be serious, his chief legal counsel warned. There is video. The video starts after the initial confrontation, Langford countered smoothly. Thornton, did Harlan say the pilot reached for his pockets? Did he say the pilot made a sudden movement before the camera started rolling? Thornton caught on immediately. It was the oldest trick in the dirty cop playbook. Yes, sir. Harlan stated the subject reached aggressively into his jacket. That's why he was detained. Officer safety. Perfect, Langford said. Draft a press release. State that Officer Harlan acted on credible suspicion regarding a potential security breach. That the individual in question became physically confrontational and reached into his garments, forcing the officer to use standard detainment protocols. We stand by our officer's vigilance. It was a massive, fatal miscalculation. They were choosing to double down on a lie against a man who had the backing of a multi-billion-dollar airline and a ruthless attorney. At 4:05 p.m., Ironclad Security released their statement. It flooded the news wires almost instantly. Not only did they refuse to apologize, but they implicitly accused Captain Cole Brennan of aggressive behavior and painted Officer Harlan as a vigilant hero, protecting the airport from a potential threat. Furthermore, they leaked to a friendly local tabloid that Cole had a history of disciplinary issues at Meridian. A complete fabrication. Sitting in the plush, leather-bound conference room of Harrington and Vail, Cole read the statement on William Harrington's iPad. The lawyer, a sharp-featured man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes, watched Cole's reaction closely. Cole did not yell. He did not throw the iPad. He just smiled, a cold, terrifyingly calm smile. They are lying, Cole said simply. Of course they are, Harrington chuckled. leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. It's the cornered rat defense. They think because they are a private security firm acting under the color of law, they have qualified immunity. They don't. And by releasing this statement, they just gave us our second cause of action, defamation per se. Harrington slid a massive, thick binder across the table. Meridian Airlines handed me their entire file on you, Cole. Spotless. Not a single reprimand in 12 years. We also pulled the raw data from the KCM portal scanner. It proves you swiped your badge at exactly 1951:32, and the system returned a green light approval at 1951:33. Harlan had absolute electronic verification of your identity before he even spoke a word to you. So what is the next step? Cole asked. We drop a nuclear bomb on them, Harrington said softly. Tomorrow morning at 9:20 a.m., we are filing a civil lawsuit in the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. We are suing Ironclad Security Group, CEO Victor Langford, Officer Trent Harlan, and Sergeant Wade Thornton. For how much? $11 million. $2 million in compensatory damages for false imprisonment, assault, battery, and defamation, and $9 million in punitive damages. We are going to make it mathematically impossible for this company to ever insure themselves again. The next morning, the lawsuit was filed. Harrington held a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse, with Cole standing stoically by his side in his full, freshly pressed Meridian Airlines uniform. The optics were devastating. Harrington eviscerated Ironclad's press release, producing a blown-up poster board showing the electronic KCM log proving Cole's clearance. But the real twist, the dagger that would begin to bleed Ironclad security to death, came 48 hours later during the initial discovery phase. Harrington's team of private investigators had not just looked into the incident. They had looked into Officer Trent Harlan. Ironclad claimed they hired highly trained professionals. The truth was far darker, and Harrington leaked it brilliantly to the Chicago Tribune. The headline hit the Sunday edition like a freight train. The rent-a-cop who arrested a captain, a history of brutality. Harlan was not just a former municipal cop who wanted a career change. The investigators discovered that Harlan had been quietly fired from the Oak Ridge Police Department 2 years prior. The reason? 3 separate excessive force complaints, all involving the detention of unarmed black motorists. He had cost the small town of Oak Ridge nearly $500,000 in quiet settlements to avoid a massive public trial. The police union had arranged for him to resign quietly. When Ironclad won the massive O'Hare Airport contract, they had desperately needed to hire 400 guards in less than 6 weeks to meet the staffing requirements. To hit their quota, they waived deep background checks for anyone who had a prior state law enforcement certification. They did not look at Harlan's internal affairs file. They just handed him a badge, handcuffs, and absolute authority over a sterile federal corridor. The revelation shattered Ironclad's defense. They could not claim it was a simple misunderstanding anymore. It was a systemic failure. They had placed a man with a documented history of racial profiling in a position to profile one of the most senior black pilots in the country. The backlash was swift and merciless. The mayor of Chicago, facing an absolute PR catastrophe and a potential civil rights investigation by the Department of Justice, summoned the Airport Authority Board to an emergency closed-door meeting. "Get them out," the mayor ordered, pointing a finger at the head of the Airport Authority. "I don't care about the cancellation clauses. I don't care about the logistics. I want Ironclad Security's contract terminated immediately. By midnight tonight, I want Chicago police officers and TSA agents manning those portals until we find a new vendor. Mayor, if we terminate the contract without a formal hearing, Ironclad will sue the city for breach of contract," the city attorney warned. "Let them sue us," the mayor shouted. "Meridian Airlines accounts for 40% of the revenue at O'Hare." Raymond Ellis called me this morning. He told me that if Ironclad guards are still in that airport by Monday morning, Meridian is going to formally petition the FAA to relocate their Midwest hub to Detroit. Do you understand what that means? We lose 30,000 jobs and $2 billion in economic impact because a racist mall cop wanted to play Rambo with a 777 captain. Fire them. At 11:15 p.m. on Sunday, less than a week after the incident, Ironclad Security Group received a formal notice of immediate termination from the city of Chicago. 350 guards were out of a job overnight. Officer Harlan and Sergeant Thornton were officially uncredentialed. Their airport access was revoked permanently. But for Cole Brennan and William Harrington, getting the company fired was not the end. It was merely the preamble. Ironclad still had a massive corporate insurance policy, and Victor Langford was still trying to maneuver his way out of the $11 million crosshairs. The legal war was about to move into the courtroom, and Ironclad's lawyers were preparing a vicious, desperate counterattack. The legal battlefield shifted from the court of public opinion to a sterile, glass-enclosed conference room on the 42nd floor of a downtown Chicago skyscraper. It was time for the depositions. Ironclad's insurance carrier had brought in their heavy artillery, Lawrence Pike, a notoriously aggressive defense attorney who specialized in shielding corporations from catastrophic liability. Pike was a man who made his living destroying the credibility of plaintiffs. His strategy was rarely to prove his clients innocent. It was to make the victims look culpable enough to confuse a jury. Cole sat perfectly still at the long mahogany table, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit. Beside him sat William Harrington, completely relaxed, casually flipping through a stack of manila folders. Across from them were Pike, a visibly sweating CEO Victor Langford, and Officer Trent Harlan, who looked like a man walking to his own execution. Pike leaned forward, steepling his fingers, his eyes locking onto Cole. "Captain Brennan," Pike began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's talk about your military record. You were an FA-18 pilot in the United States Navy, a highly stressful environment. Would you agree that military pilots are trained to possess a certain aggressive superiority? An expectation of absolute compliance from their subordinates?" "Objection," Harrington said mildly, not even looking up. "Relevance. My client wasn't flying a fighter jet. He was walking down a hallway." "I'll rephrase," Pike snapped. "Captain Brennan, when Officer Harlan instructed you to step back, you felt insulted, didn't you? You felt that a mere security guard had no right to question a man of your stature. So you decided to escalate the situation by refusing a lawful order, thus forcing my client to detain you for his own safety." Cole looked at Pike. He did not take the bait. He did not show anger. "I did not escalate the situation, Mr. Pike," Cole said evenly. "I complied with the federal screening process. Officer Harlan then bypassed the digital verification system to rely on his own personal biases. He did not give a lawful order. He gave a discriminatory one." "Oh, come now," Pike scoffed, pulling a still photograph from his briefcase and sliding it across the table. It was a grainy frame grabbed from the viral cell phone video. It showed Cole's hand moving toward his chest. "Officer Harlan testified under oath yesterday that you aggressively reached into your jacket. In a post-9/11 airport environment, that is a threat indicator. He had a split second to react. He detained you to ensure you weren't reaching for a weapon. That is standard operating procedure, not racism." A smug smile crept onto Victor Langford's face. Pike had just laid the trap. If they could convince a jury that Harlan felt legitimately threatened by Cole's movement, the false imprisonment and assault charges would evaporate under the shield of security protocols. William Harrington sighed heavily, closing his folder. He looked over at the corporate insurance adjuster, a quiet woman sitting in the corner of the room who held the actual purse strings. "Mr. Pike," Harrington said, his voice deceptively soft, "it's a bold strategy. Blaming the black man for reaching for his wallet when asked for his ID. It's a classic. But it relies entirely on the premise that Officer Harlan only decided to use force after Captain Brennan moved his hand." Harrington pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and slid it into the laptop on the table. He mirrored the screen to the large monitor on the wall. "You see," Harrington continued. The cell phone video that went viral only started recording about 20 seconds into the altercation. It missed the initial interaction. But Meridian Airlines, anticipating your exact defense, pulled the 4K security footage from the camera positioned directly above gate M12, the one looking straight down the corridor. Harlan visibly flinched. Langford's smug smile vanished. Harrington hit play. The silent high-definition footage showed the entire scene from above. It showed Cole swiping his badge, the scanner lighting up green, Harlan stepping into the path. Now watch closely, Harrington said, pausing the video and zooming in on Harlan's duty belt. He advanced the footage frame by frame. At timestamp 1952:02, Captain Brennan is standing perfectly still, his hands at his sides. He has not reached for his wallet yet, but look at Officer Harlan. On the screen, Harlan's hand was already unfastening the retention strap of his handcuffs. Before Captain Brennan even speaks, before he makes a single movement toward his pocket, Officer Harlan is preparing to shackle him, Harrington said, his voice now ringing with absolute authority. This wasn't a reaction to a perceived threat, Mr. Pike. This was premeditated humiliation. Your client decided to arrest my client the second he laid eyes on him. The room fell deathly silent. The insurance adjuster in the corner scribbled furiously on her notepad, her face pale. Furthermore, Harrington added, twisting the knife, we have subpoenaed the dispatch audio. 10 seconds before this confrontation, Officer Harlan radioed Sergeant Thornton. His exact words were, I got a guy playing dress-up coming down the lane. I'm going to teach him a lesson. We have the recording. Pike stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. He was a ruthless lawyer, but he knew when he was looking at a total catastrophic defeat. There was no defense against premeditation caught on tape and audio. Harrington leaned across the table, locking eyes with Victor Langford. If you take this to a jury, Mr. Langford, they won't just give us 11 million. They will give us 50 million. They will pierce your corporate veil. They will take your house, your cars, and your company. You are done. The capitulation was absolute and staggering in its speed. Within 48 hours of the deposition, Ironclad's insurance provider forced Victor Langford's hand. They informed him that if he did not settle the case immediately, they would drop his coverage for gross negligence and bad faith. Facing complete financial ruin, Langford surrendered. The terms of the settlement were historic, designed not just to compensate Cole, but to send a shockwave through the entire private security industry. Ironclad Security agreed to pay the full $11 million demanded by Harrington and Vail. But Cole was not just interested in the money. He demanded and received binding non-financial stipulations. First, Victor Langford was required to sign a full, unredacted public apology to Captain Cole Brennan and Meridian Airlines, admitting that the actions of his employees were driven by racial profiling and entirely without merit. Second, Trent Harlan and Wade Thornton were permanently barred from ever working in the private security sector again. Their certifications were voluntarily surrendered as part of the deal. Finally, Ironclad was forced to fund a $2 million aviation scholarship program administered by Meridian Airlines, specifically aimed at providing flight school tuition for minority youth in the Chicago area. When the settlement was announced to the press, it dominated the news cycle for a week. Ironclad Security, already bleeding from the loss of the Chicago airport contract, lost 3 more major municipal contracts in the fallout. Within 6 months, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, dissolving into the ashes of its own arrogance. But for Cole Brennan, the true victory was not the collapse of the security firm or the zeros in his bank account. It was the return to normalcy, the reclaiming of his dignity. 3 weeks after the incident, on a crisp Tuesday evening, Captain Cole Brennan returned to O'Hare International Airport. The terminal was just as busy as it had been on that fateful night. But this time, things were different. As Cole walked down the concourse toward gate M12, his rolling bag trailing behind him, the atmosphere shifted. The private security podiums were gone. replaced by uniformed Chicago police officers and TSA supervisors. As Cole approached the crew bypass corridor, the CPD officer on duty recognized him. The officer did not ask for his ID, did not block his path. Instead, the officer stood up straight, offered a respectful nod, and stepped aside. "Have a good flight, Captain," the officer said. "Thank you, officer," Cole replied. As he walked down the jet bridge and stepped into the massive cockpit of the Boeing 777, First Officer Tyler Brooks was already in the right seat, running through the pre-flight checklists. Tyler looked up and grinned. "Welcome back, boss," Tyler said. Cole settled into the left seat, the captain's seat. He looked out the window at the tarmac, then down at the 4 gold stripes on his sleeves. They had not been tarnished. If anything, they shone a little brighter. He reached up, flicked the battery switches, and brought the massive aircraft to life. "Let's go to London, Tyler," Cole said quietly, slipping on his headset. He was exactly where he belonged, and no one would ever question it again.